In the cradle of civilization, where the Euphrates once glimmered like molten glass beneath the Mesopotamian sun, there rose a city whose very name still stirs the imagination, Babylon. A place where gods were not distant figures in the sky, but living presences woven into the rhythm of daily life. Its towers kissed the heavens, its markets shimmered with gold and spices, yet behind that brilliance lay a world few today can comprehend. A world where desire was devotion, where the body was a temple, and where faith itself pulsed to the rhythm of drums echoing from Ishtar's shrine. Tonight, we journey into that forgotten city, not the Babylon of sin and decadence told by conquerors, but the Babylon that worshipped creation as sacred, and saw in every touch, every harvest, and every breath the reflection of divine balance. Because long before the word sin was written, there was only one truth the Babylonians believed, that life, love, and divinity were one and the same. The world, to the Babylonians, was a living fabric woven by gods and mortals alike, and the threads of that fabric were bound by one name, Ishtar. She was beauty and terror, tenderness and rage, the goddess who governed love and battle with the same hand, who blessed the harvest and devoured kings. Her eyes, carved in lapis and gold, watched over every act of longing, not to condemn it, but to consecrate it. The temples built in her honor were unlike any others in Mesopotamia. The walls shimmered with glazed brick, the scent of frankincense lingered for miles, and within, the sound of flutes and drums rose like heartbeat and breath. Each rhythm carried the same message, that the act of love of creation itself was divine imitation. To join body with body was to echo the union of sky and earth, Anu and Ki, whose celestial marriage gave birth to life. This was no private indulgence. It was a theology. Babylon's priests spoke of Zai, the life force that flowed through every living thing. To deny it was to deny the gods themselves. Fertility, whether of soil, womb, or spirit, was sacred currency, and Ishtar was its guardian. So long as her fires burned, Babylon's rivers would swell, its fields would yield, and its people would multiply beneath her gaze. Yet there was a cost. Every gift of Ishtar came with a mirror. Her myths tell of lovers undone by her passion, Dumuzi, her mortal consort, dragged into the underworld when his heart failed to match her fury. Her worshippers knew, to touch the goddess, even symbolically, was to invite transformation. The women who served her were not passive vessels. They were Entu priestesses trained in ritual song, movement, and the delicate art of sacred offering. Some bore tattoos of doves or stars. Others wore veils of shimmering linen, as they performed nightly invocations under moonlight. Visitors to Babylon spoke of processions where these priestesses carried torches through the streets, scattering petals and firelight. Men bowed as they passed, not out of lust, but reverence. To witness them was to glimpse divinity in human form. In one surviving hymn, an Entu sings, "I am the torch of Ishtar. I burn that the world may be renewed." The ritual of renewal was central to Babylon's survival. Each year, during the festival of the goddess, citizens gathered before her temple. Offerings of honey, dates, and wine filled the air with sweetness. Couples clasped hands and whispered prayers for fertility, not just of wombs, but of hopes and crops and fortunes. The city became a living altar, and every gesture, every kiss, was an act of devotion. But beyond the public celebration, deeper mysteries awaited. In inner sanctuaries, behind carved doors guarded by soldiers, priests prepared the sacred chambers. There, incense thickened the air until time seemed to dissolve. What occurred inside was spoken of only in symbols, the joining of heaven and earth, the awakening of the seed. Modern scholars call these rites erotic, but to the Babylonians they were acts of alignment. Desire was the bridge through which mortal energy met divine purpose. It is easy, centuries later, to misunderstand this. To imagine indulgence where there was, in truth, precision. Each gesture was prescribed. Each motion followed an order as strict as the turning of the stars. The participants were not lovers in the modern sense. They were instruments of cosmic renewal. When the priestess invoked Ishtar's name, when the priest responded in kind, they were believed to be channeling the union that sustained existence itself. A clay tablet found near Uruk bears a single line, written in cuneiform. When the goddess smiles, the land shall bear fruit. The smile was metaphorical, yet to the people of Babylon, it was everything. If the rituals pleased her, the fields flourished. If not, the Tigris could dry 2 cracked bone, and the Euphrates drown entire harvests. The stakes were nothing less than survival. Still, not every Babylonian agreed with the excess of her cult. Scribal records suggest that even within temple walls, debates simmered. Some priests feared the goddess's dual nature, her appetite for both tenderness and destruction. She devours what she blesses, one scribe wrote. To please her is to surrender. But surrender was the point. The city itself was built upon that paradox, that through yielding came renewal, and so the legend grew. From the humblest farmer to the king himself, all were bound to the cycle of her worship. Every birth, every marriage, every festival echoed her myth. The goddess who demanded desire had woven herself into the blood of Babylon. Tonight, if you could walk those ruined streets, you might still hear her echo, the distant drumbeat that once guided thousands to her temple gates, the sound of footsteps on stone, the whisper of silk, and perhaps, beneath the weight of millennia, you would understand what the Babylonians once believed, that the divine was not above them, but within them, burning, breathing, demanding to be remembered. And beyond the temple doors, a single light remains flickering in the darkness, leading to the next revelation, the night when mortal and divine would meet face to face. The night began with silence, a silence so complete it seemed the city itself held its breath. Even the Euphrates, that eternal witness to Babylon's glory, flowed quietly beneath the moon. Torches flared along the ziggurats' terraces, their flames bending in the night wind like tongues of gold. From distant courtyards came the steady pulse of drums, slow, deliberate, heart-like inside the royal palace. Every lamp burned with perfumed oil. Every servant moved barefoot. Tonight was not a night for noise. It was the night the mortal king would seek the favor of the divine. The Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, was more than a ritual. It was Babylon's covenant with the heavens, a reenactment of the divine union between Ishtar and Dumosi, the goddess of love and her doomed shepherd lover. Yet what took place within the temple's inner chamber was also a carefully constructed act of statecraft, one that fused religion and power into a single performance of cosmic legitimacy. For if the king failed to please the goddess, or the priestess who embodied her, the year ahead would bring ruin. At sunset, the high priestess of Ishtar bathed in a basin carved from alabaster. Attendants anointed her skin with oil of myrrh, and combed her hair with ivory teeth. Over her body they draped a robe of translucent linen, embroidered with pomegranates, stars, and serpents, symbols of fertility and eternal return. Her wrists bore bangles of electrum that caught the lamplight like captured suns. As they prepared her, they whispered invocations. You are the gate of life, the mouth of heaven, the heart of the goddess. Outside, the king fasted in ritual solitude. His armor had been set aside. In its place, he wore only a simple white mantle, tied with a cord dyed in the color of blood. His body was washed in river water gathered before dawn. On his head gleamed the diadem of Babylon, the golden circle that marked him as chosen of Ishtar. Yet tonight, that crown meant nothing, unless the goddess accepted him anew. The crown could be lost, not in war, but in silence. When the drums ceased, a hush spread across the palace. From the upper terraces, priests bearing torches descended in solemn procession, chanting the verses of creation, when heaven was not yet named, nor earth below defined. The chant echoed through the courtyards, rippling like wind over sand. The people of Babylon, gathered beyond the temple gates, listened in awe. For though they would never see what occurred within, they believed that every flicker of torchlight above reflected the pulse of the gods. The king approached the temple barefoot. Between the massive doors stood the high priest of Ishtar, holding a torch of cedar resin. The priest's voice rang out, ancient and resonant. Who comes to seek the favor of the Lady of Love in battle? The king bowed his head. I, who am dust before her light. Then enter, the priest said, and let your breath become hers. The great doors groaned open. Inside, the air was thick with incense, sandalwood, myrrh, and the faint sweetness of spiced wine. Gold panels reflected the torchlight, transforming the chamber into a living sun. At the far end, upon a dais of polished stone, stood the high priestess. For this one night, she was not a woman. She was Ishtar incarnate, the embodiment of creation's desire and destruction's promise. Her eyes met his, and in that gaze lay the weight of an empire. What followed was not the abandon of passion, but choreography, deliberate, sacred, slow. The priestess circled the king 3 times, her anklets chiming softly. Each revolution marked a blessing. One for the land, one for the people, one for the continuity of the throne. When she stopped before him, she lifted a cup of honeyed wine, and spoke the words preserved on broken tablets. Drink, beloved of the goddess. Drink, and may your seed renew the earth. He drank, The ritual cup passed from her hand to his, then back again. Music rose, flutes, lyres, and the hollow thrum of drums, a rhythm that echoed the pulse of the cosmos itself. The priestess raised her hands toward the sky and began to chant the verses of Ishtar's descent into the underworld, the eternal cycle of death and return. Each phrase carried the promise that what was joined tonight would bloom in spring. And then, when the music reached its final crescendo, the two ascended the dais together. Curtains of blue linen fell around them, veiling their forms from the eyes of priests and attendants. Outside, the city erupted in sound, bells, horns, cheers, and the beating of drums. The people did not need to see. The act itself was cosmic. Their world depended upon it. For in that chamber, the king was not merely a man, he was Dumuzi reborn. And the priestess, in her voice and movement, became the goddess who tamed chaos through love. Theirs was a drama of creation, a living myth that renewed Babylon's divine mandate to exist. When dawn broke, the priestess emerged first, her robe damp with dew, her face serene. Behind her walked the king, his eyes shadowed, his body marked with saffron and oil. He carried in his hands a bowl of water drawn from the sacred well, which he poured upon the earth before the temple gates. As it soaked into the soil, the crowd fell silent. The sun climbed over the horizon, catching the ziggurat in a blaze of gold. Babylon's year had begun, but among the priests, whispers stirred. Had the goddess truly accepted him? Some claimed the oil lamps flickered too soon, that a shadow passed across the altar. Others swore they heard the priestess weep softly as the final chant ended. Whatever truth lay behind those veils remained within the walls of the temple. Yet all of Babylon knew one thing. If the crops failed, if the river rose too high, they would look to that night and ask whether the sacred marriage had been broken. And so the drums faded, leaving only the memory of footsteps on marble, a union both divine and human, fragile as flame. Beyond the horizon, another dawn waited, and with it, the beginning of Babylon's most dangerous secret. What happens when the goddess no longer answers? When the armies of Cyrus entered Babylon, the drums of Ishtar fell silent. The air that once trembled with hymns, now carried only the echo of sandals on stone. The ziggurat still stood, proud but hollow, its terraces stripped of flowers, its altars cold. Among the rubble, a Persian chronicler recorded what he thought he saw. Women once gave themselves to strangers in her temple, in honor of a goddess of lust. But that was not truth. That was conquest, dressed as morality. For centuries, the victors would retell the story of Babylon, not as the city of laws, gardens, and stars, but as a den of seduction. The Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans, each added new layers to the tale. What had once been a theology of life's renewal became a parable of decadence. A civilization that saw creation as divine union was reduced to a single phrase: the whore of Babylon. The misunderstanding began in translation. Herodotus, traveling through Mesopotamia in the 5th century BCE, wrote that every woman of Babylon must, at least once, sit in the temple of Ishtar and lie with a stranger. He called it a sacred custom, but he never saw it himself. His guides, likely unfamiliar with the old Sumerian rites, had confused metaphor for ritual. The offering of symbolic tokens, fruits, flowers, coins, was mistaken for an offering of flesh. A linguistic shadow became history. Yet the rumor suited the age. To the Persians, still carving an empire upon the bones of Babylon, moral superiority was a weapon sharper than iron. To the Greeks, whose poets longed to contrast their reason with Eastern excess, it became proof of their own enlightenment. And when Rome inherited both the myths and the ruins, it turned Babylon into an emblem of sin, the sensual East, where women ruled desire and men forgot restraint. The West's oldest prejudice was born from those ashes. In truth, no Babylonian inscription, no administrative tablet, no temple record ever described such prostitution. The Intu priestesses of Ishtar were not courtesans, but theologians trained in astronomy, poetry, and law. Their duties were complex, their rites symbolic. Yet history, like empire, favors simplicity. It is easier to condemn what you do not understand than to translate it faithfully. As new religions spread across the Near East, the story of Ishtar's rites took on darker shades. The goddess of love was reborn under new names: Inanna, Astarte, Aphrodite, each time stripped of her cosmic power and confined to the realm of passion alone. The temple became a brothel in scripture. The priestess became a warning. By the time of the early Christians, Babylon itself was no longer a place, but an idea. the eternal city of corruption, the foil to Jerusalem's purity. Revelation's verses sealed it. Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. It was the final transformation, theology into taboo, reverence into revulsion. Yet beneath the condemnations, fragments of truth survived. Clay tablets unearthed from beneath the ruins spoke of hymns and offerings, not indulgence. They described rites of renewal, prayers for harvest, poems that blended sensual imagery with divine longing. Your breath is the wind of spring, your touch, the seed of the world. These were not words of sin, they were acts of faith. Still, perception is power, and in every generation that followed, the image of Babylon grew darker. Medieval scribes painted her as a jeweled temptress. Renaissance artists turned her into allegory. Modern archaeologists, sifting through her ruins, found themselves haunted by the tension between myth and evidence. Was the West's obsession with Babylon a reflection of its own unease with desire, or simply fascination with a civilization unafraid to sanctify it? There were moments of rediscovery. In the 19th century, when excavations at Hilla first revealed fragments of the Ishtar Gate, scholars realized how deeply her symbols had endured. The lions, the rosettes, the dragons, all spoke of a goddess who embodied both creation and chaos. Yet even then, newspapers called the find the portal to the world's oldest debauchery. The myth proved harder to bury than the city itself. In truth, what Babylon celebrated was balance, between sky and soil, man and woman, flesh and spirit. Their rituals were mirrors of the cosmos, performed not for pleasure's sake, but for renewal. Yet when later empires built their moral order, they chose to remember only the flesh, not the sacred. And so, the goddess who once governed fertility became a symbol of ruin. The same rites that ensured life's return were rewritten as warnings against excess. History remembers Babylon's passion as sin, not wisdom. The victors sanctified restraint and buried her truth. Yet on moonlit nights, her song still drifts over the Euphrates, defying silence. They say it is Ishtar herself, waiting to be seen not as sin, but as source. Babylon fell, but its forbidden truth endures, that the divine was never distant. It once lived within the body,